Hi, I'm Brett Zamir. In this video, I'll be introducing you to how to use WebAppFind, a browser add-on which lets you open local desktop files directly into web apps of your choosing. The add-on is currently Mac and Firefox only, but support for other platforms or browsers may be added in the future. For an introduction to why we want to allow web apps to gain access to local files, and the benefits we'd see for managing our local files with web apps, see our other video on this topic. Given that we've mentioned the ability to open desktop files, you might be curious or concerned about the security and privacy. We should note that sites are not otherwise granted by WebAppFind any arbitrary permissions to open or even to request to open files from your desktop. The most the site can do is indicate that they support WebAppFind and make suggestions for file associations, which you can review if you wish to make such file associations and when you wish to make the file association. But websites do not get permissions to access your local files, nor are they even empowered to prompt you to grant such permissions. Permission to read and optionally to write is only granted if you use the command line or if you build an executable and associate that executable with a certain file type. And then you open that file of that type with the executable. In that case, that particular file, the web app will be empowered to read from and optionally write to that file. We'll first go quickly through what you need to do to get started, and then we'll explain the usage more after that. There are two steps, unfortunately, that are necessary for installation. One is to run an executable installer. This one is not available on the add-on site, it's only available on our site. Back in the good old days for add-on developers, a programmer could easily make a Firefox add-on which had the power to read from the file system or do other potentially powerful and useful things. But because the browsers wanted to make it easier on themselves and avoid dangerous add-ons getting past their review process, they limited what a browser add-on could do. And even for the things it still could do, they required explicit permissions to be requested and granted for that which they could do. Okay, but for getting the old power back, the browsers did leave one way by which developers could get some powerful features back into their add-ons for the benefit of their users, however. This mechanism is called native messaging. It provides a means by which an executable, a native application, can be invoked by the add-on to do the add-on's heavy lifting, and then it can communicate back and forth with the add-on as necessary. But in order to get these features, you have to perform an installation beyond the normal add-on install, and that's what we do here. The installer will add the executable to locations where the add-on can find it and therefore can open it. And then step 2 is to install the add-on itself. It's going to be a file with an XPI extension, is the one you can find on the Firefox add-on site. It'll be of that type. Once the add-on is installed, it acts as the mediator between the executable that we already installed in step 1 and between that executable and the browser. Now we're going to go over the couple ways that you can get your data files to open through WebAppFind. There's two basic ways of doing that. At the lowest level, or at a low level, WebAppFind can be triggered to open files from the command line. To give a brief explanation for technical users, when the add-on starts up, the add-on's executable is alerted to set up a local Node WebSocket server. This server then listens for WebSocket client communications as well as for command line invocations. The messages it receives will be sent through native messaging to the browser and add-on and will instruct the browser on what web app URL to open and what file contents to pass to it and in what manner. So there's a little bit of configuration when running it from the command line. Most importantly would be the web app URL and the file or the file contents. However, fortunately for the benefit of non-technical users, rather than you needing to perform the commands to get web app to work, rather than requiring you to use a terminal window, it's generally much more practical and easy for you to use WebAppFind to get an executable file built on your behalf and then get that executable associated with a particular file extension or file type, so that whenever you choose to open a file of that type on your desktop or on a one-off basis as you wish, the executable will communicate with WebAppFind for you to open your desired web app for that file. Now, as with the command line, the executable will contain info on the web app to open, and it will pass along for you the info on the file path that was clicked, or that you happen to click at that time. Rather than needing to build an executable yourself, you can use a component of WebAppFind called Executable Builder, which will build the executable for you. Now, if you wish, you could, of course, make your own executable that handles, the input of the file and then passes it to the command line or whatnot, but we won't go over that now. Since you will need a separate executable for each combination of data file type and web application, WebAppFind comes bundled with Executable Builder, which is a component which lets you build and install such executables. These executables will pass along the data of the file they were invoked upon, and they can optionally be built to gain the privilege for a particular website to write back data to the same file. These executables, again, they get associated on your desktop with files of a particular extension or file type, and then they bake in the particular web app that they're going to open in. In the future, we may move this functionality to its own add-on, but it's currently bundled. Before going over the specific form fields in the Executable Builder, I'll introduce you here to the two ways that you can quickly populate data. If we go to a window in Firefox where we have the add-on installed, we've got the add-on installed, we've run the installer. So this will show this icon here, which is icon of exec representing the Executable Builder portion. We click that. We can see at the top here, there may be sometimes only one pull down here, but first I'll introduce you to the second pull down. The second pull down indicates that you can quickly populate the fields here with a template if you've previously saved one. Basically, you just need to give it a name. You can give it a description, add some notes here for why you're keeping a template. And then if you click this button after you've populated the field, you can create the executable and save the template at the same time. So when you reuse it, you just come back here to choose the specific one you wanted, and you'd highlight one. If you'd already made one that you didn't want anymore, you'd click to delete it. The other way that you can quickly populate data is using suggestions from the website. Okay, we have a special repository of demos that work with WebAppFind. Also in this repository, which is called WebAppFind Demo Samples, besides the sample web apps and the sample files that you can open into those web apps, it has a sample file showing how a website can advertise which file types that it supports. When you, at your discretion, use WebAppFind's Executable Builder, you can optionally use the website suggestions as a base for building your executable. So this website, although you can't see it, in the code we've done is we've used the helper library, which all it does is it builds meta elements. We can see those elements that are built by inspecting the page. This is all technical stuff, but this is only need for developers. But we have a bunch of, see, meta tags here. The name is WebAppFind, and then it has content, which is used to inform WebAppFind of which file types this web app would like to register itself to be used with. For example, if this website wanted to handle all your HTML files or your JSON files or whatever, it could advertise it within these meta elements. And this is the library that makes it more convenient or more human readable to add those meta tags. Okay, but this is invisible to the user. However, when you go to our add-on, we can use the second way of pre-populating, which is this first pull down here. We can populate with the settings that are recommended by the particular site that we have open in the current tab. And you saw all those meta tags. Well, this is what all those meta tags create. It suggests a bunch of file types that this website wants to be able to handle, or it offers to you to be able to handle. So for example, if we choose edit HTML, it pre-populates the rest of the form fields with some specific information, which we'll go over shortly. Okay, and as I mentioned, we have that repository WebAppFind Demo Samples, which has a number of open source apps that you can use, demonstrating the various file types for opening into WebAppFind. One thing we might mention about this file, which has the meta elements, is it can actually run over the file protocol. It's not limited like the web apps. Unfortunately, because of some browser limitations, the web apps we're going to use to open up, we can't open up a file protocol as a web app. Not just because of the restrictions of file for loading scripts and whatnot, but also just because the add-on can't empower the web app to do what we need it to do. Okay, currently we're using these meta elements that get added to the head, but in the future, if this becomes standardized, it looks like they may just point to a manifest file, and the manifest file will indicate the file types that are supported. But we've gone with the meta approach. It's more immediately visible. Okay, now for the specific form types. Okay, we basically have 5 types of fields we'll introduce you to that are needed in Executable Builder. Actually, the 5th one is optional, but there are 5 types of information that you'll want to add. One is info on the executable. I've already introduced you to this top section here. We go down here, we come to the other type of data we have, which is info on the executable. That includes the name of the executable. That's what's going to show up in your open with pull down and whatnot. That's important. You have to have the name. Currently, this field isn't showing as required, but because you technically can make executables without it, but it's essentially required for what we're going to be doing here, which is giving the app a unique ID. This is used by the Mac, and it's in the format of a reverse domain, which is basically like, for example, if you have a domain that's myappid.mydomain.com, it will be in this form. It'll be reversed. The com will be first, and then the middle one, my domain, and then the first one, my app ID. And then finally, there's the directory, because you have to save the executable somewhere. So we can choose a predefined field of where to save the executable. You're actually not typically going to directly click this executable, and if you use this file type association here, you won't really need to know where it is. So you can just tuck it away and store it in the Firefox profile folder or in your startup items, or these are just some predefined fields you can use of where to put your executables. You can just store it on the desktop for now so we can easily find it, but we typically won't actually need to. So I'm going to give it a name. Let's say if we want to edit some HTML, or we want to create a builder that edits HTML, we'll call it edit HTML. I'll give it my domain is brettzamir.me. So I start with the me, and then I do the Brett Zamir. And then I add some other identifier, and so in this case I'll just do edit HTML test. This should be unique across all your applications on your desktop. Then the second major type of category we have is for associating file types. Basically, there's two routes you can go here. One is associating the executable with all files that have a particular extension or content type. And the second way is if you just choose some specific file that the executable will always open. Usually you're going to probably want the first type, but it may be convenient in some cases, like just to make an icon available on your dock or whatnot that you can always open the same file in your web app. When we double click the file, that's the default. That's what the default opening program is. You can find out what that is by get info. Here, I'll show you from file, go to get info or Command I. And then in this case, it's showing that it's set by default to open in the program Text Wrangler, which is a text editing program. But when we right click, we get a bunch of other choices here. These are using what in our program is called the executable name. So if you don't associate it with by default, you can still associate it so that your web app will at least show up here, so that when you right click the file, you can choose, well, maybe normally I don't want to open it in my web app, but sometimes I want to have the ability, so it should show up there. Here are where the fields are. So we already introduced the executable info. I've got to enter this again because I left the program, but the .html extension. We can also add one though. Let's say I also wanted to work with .htm files. Let's say we want it to be the default for .htm files. We can choose not to have it for .html, but let's do it for both. Now the content type, in the future we might change this to MIME types, which are more cross-platform, but currently these are associated with Mac content types. For example, public.html. So we'll associate it with that content type. So even if your file has a different extension, as long as it's known to be public HTML, it'll also be empowered to open it. Okay, alternatively, if we didn't associate it with file types, we could have baked in a particular file that this executable would always open, a specific file. We can choose a program on our, find the file and go to it. There's autocomplete here. So for example, if we go to our documents folder and we want to, you see I've got some specific files in this location. I could select them if file type that I wanted to open was there. So the third type of information is the URL. In a previous incarnation of WebAppFind, when it was Windows only instead of Mac only, we had a certain file that you could save within a directory called filetypes.json. And that would have information about how to resolve the URL. In the case of mode, the view mode, the add-on will use post message to post a message into that website, and the website, if it's listening, can read the file contents and display it, and then optionally it can only read from your desktop those files which you open in it. Edit, of course, does have the additional power. Besides viewing, it will also be able to write back to disk. And then finally there's the shell mode, which typically for programmers would use it, which is a mode whereby, for example, if you have a JavaScript file, instead of opening the JavaScript file in a read-only mode where you could read the JavaScript contents, and instead of being able to edit the JavaScript file, it would actually execute that JavaScript file. We can also pass on extra arguments here in JSON form and basically indicate something like, please open in the dark theme. Now let's say our web app was at example.com, HTML reader.html. So in other words, the theme information wouldn't need to be inside the URL like this. It would be passed through post message instead. So web apps might wish you to pass your arguments into them like that rather than polluting the URL. Before we go into a demo of, from beginning to end of actually building an executable and associating files with it, just give you some overview of the possible kinds of types of files you can use. There's really no limit to what kinds of files you could use, but yeah, here's an overview that we have available in our WebAppFind demo samples repository. One of the most useful types of files that you might associate is HTML, because it's obviously because it's understood in the browser. It's used the basis of the web, and it can pretty much represent most types of text and images. You can also use PDF, which we can talk about a little bit later, as well as other file types that might conceivably be supported that would be similar. Would be like an RTF file or even Word files, but the amount of processing required for handling Word files would be kind of heavy. So a web app would really need to be equipped to do not just adapt some Word in the clipboard, but also be able to save a well-formed file back to disk. To create our executable, which can edit HTML files, we go to Executable Builder icon. We're going to, in this case, because we have the tab open from the WebAppFind Demo Samples repository, which suggests a bunch of associations for us, we'll take advantage of that. And while we have the tab open, we click the icon, and then it gives us this pull down as a result. In which case, we're going to choose right now to be able to edit HTML files. It does not choose where on my desktop to save the executable, so I have to indicate that myself. Okay, now it's going to work with the HTML extension with the public.html content type. Let's also get it to work with the HTML extension. Sometimes some of the older web apps use that. We don't care about a hard-coded desktop file because we're going to have our web app work with any HTML file rather than just a particular HTML file. We're going to want the edit mode so that we can save back changes to disk. These are the ones that come with the WebAppFind Demo Samples repository, and they're convenient not only because we provide some apps for you that you can use and which are open source out of the box, but you can also run them on localhost. This web URL could be on the internet, but in this case, it's just suggesting something that runs on a local server. Now we'll have to start up the server, but that local server has the advantage that you actually don't even need to be on the internet and send your data over the wire to be able to work with your local data files in a web app. Your web app can be served from this localhost. Of course, part of the big advantage of using WebAppFind is that it can work with websites on the web that you can discover on the web. So if you had someone else's URL that you knew about, you could add it here that the website suggested, but we're going to use our own. We're going to run our own server. I'll have to start that in a minute, so anyways, we have all the information we need. So we go ahead and let's make a template. I'll just show you that. This is for associating apps with the HTML type. Now adding it as a template, now when we save it, so it'll create an executable, it'll associate these files for us, and it'll save a template. Click to create the executable. There's not any particular feedback except you might see the script opening up, an Apple script that does the HTML file association for us. We probably should get some better feedback mechanism to display a dialog or something about what has happened, but we can confirm that the association of HTML files has been made by visiting the desktop and then finding an HTML file. And then if we go to get info on HTML files, we'll notice that, lo and behold, the default is in fact set to open any HTML file here with this edit HTML app. Edit HTML is the executable name we used. So we confirmed it did the association for us. I've got to make sure the web app is running, so I do npm start while I'm inside the web app demo samples Okay, so now our local server is running, but you wouldn't need to follow this step if you were just, you were opening your files into some other web app like your own server or someone else's server. This is only for running with the local server. Okay, so now we made it the default, so it should open once we double click the file. I'll double click the file. It opens a script which opens the tab in Firefox. I have to switch tabs because I'm running two Firefoxes right now, but you can see it actually opened. This is the actual contents of that HTML file. It's opened it into a web app. This web app is based on CKEditor and open source WYSIWYG HTML editing. But let's say I want to make some changes to the file that existed. I just deleted a little bit that was there, and this is some new content. You can just work with it just like you're working on a regular word processor. I'll use the beloved Comic Sans. Give it a larger file. I'll make it bold and italics just to be even more lovely, right? Okay, and I just save it back to disk. I can also use a key command. Now let's confirm. I'll use diffs. Now we can see in the diffs program I have here that sure enough it changed this line to remove that little text that I had at the end, and it added a paragraph, all this HTML here, which says this is some new content, including the bold, the strong, the emphasis, meaning the italics and whatnot. So it's all there. So we were able to open the HTML and save back to disk. However, it's not just for editing program files. You can also open other file formats, for example, specialized text files. Some of the popular ones include Markdown, CSV, and text files. I'll take a look at opening these types of files right now. Program here, I have to have the tab open so I can find the pre-populate, let's say edit Markdown files. Save to the desktop. I don't need to create a template for it, but you'll notice that the template I created before for HTML templates is still here if I wanted to use it. So edit Markdown, this is the ID, this is the file location, it's for MD file type files, and it has this content type that's specific to Markdown. Edit mode, open our localhost demo web app. I'll just create that executable. Okay, it opens the script, so now it's done the associations it should need. Now I'm going to go back to the desktop, and in my sample test files, I'm going to find a Markdown changes file. So the changes file should look like this, but I'll double click it because we did make it the default. It switches to Firefox, and we see, hey, look what we've got here. We've got the Markdown in an editor already. Now let's see, I'll add a new item here. This is not correct, but I'll just say something, some new cool stuff. Okay, this kind of file format like Markdown is typically of interest to web developers, but I'll save it. It says the save was complete, and I will confirm that. And indeed, the changes file does reflect what I added. But that's not all. Let's also check out editing CSV files. We've added a nice demo that simple, but allows you to use a table editor, so it's more visually friendly. We'll go ahead and create the executable. Pretty much all you have to do with these pre-populated ones is add a saving location. We wait for the script to open. It opens up. It's associating the file format. Now when we go to the Finder, we go back to our sample test files. We find the test CSV file, and on double clicking it, it opens Firefox up, and here we go. The CSV is the file is here. Now, this file is just demonstrating the fact that it does correctly handle quotation marks and some of the separators that are used within CSV files. Again, this file format is probably usually of interest to developers, but if you're exporting a table or something, you might want to use this format yourself. If you've got some data table, I think we right click here, let's add a row, some new text. Okay, and then we're just going to save changes back to disk. Confirm that the changes occurred, and here we go in our CSV export. You can see the source. It's added some new text. Let's try it with a comma separated, so we'll add row 3 here, and just add that too. So make sure that we see the comma separation in action. And sure enough, you see a comma there separating them. Doesn't need quotes in this case because there's nothing to escape, but let's see if I put in commas in here. See for escaping. I've added a comma, and it's been, you've noticed that row 3 is now within quotation marks, so those commas don't act as separators that are here. But there is one separator, though, the afterwards, that just because it has an empty field, it saved that. Okay, so, and in addition, of course, a very simple format, we can try to handle TXT files too. Okay, it's doing associating. Let's open this text file, just some text here, just that's all it is. Very simple, but if you have text files, you can edit them with a web app too. So here's some text, add some more, and save. Of course, your web app can be more sophisticated. You could have buttons to pre-populate text or whatever you might want to do. This is just some very simple demos, and we confirm in the diffs that here, sure enough, that adds some more that's been added to the text file. Okay, so in addition to HTML, which should be of interest to average users, in addition to specialized text files, which might be interested to regular users but might more often be of interest to developers, some programs might work to wish with some kind of custom type, which might have a custom extension. So for example, if we have a file that we just want to give it our own type, like my type, or if it's like some game, or .fuzzy aliens could be the extension. So that when you open a file of that type, it might open your web app like a game or whatever that handles that file type. In this case, we'll just have a simple association. And besides text type files, you can also work with images, other multimedia. Well, we'll take a look at one type of image file. It's like just a text-based image file. It's called SVG, which is a format I recommend. It's scalable, unlike other images. So we will do an association for SVG. Find our sample SVG file. Okay, you could open it also with open with. So it's opening our editing program, which in this case is based on the web app SVG edit, and this is the image that was saved previously. But let's do some more. Let's add a little bit here. And save image back to disk, because this program can save it in memory, but let's save it back to disk. So we saved it. Check our diff viewer. The SVG file has indeed been edited. So if we close it and just confirm, you can see on the desktop that the changes are applied. And when we open the file again, we'll actually see our changes right here. But that's not all. Besides the text-based image format, it can work with binary images, the typical things you think of as image files. PNG, JPEG, GIF, and ICO files. I'll just show you one of these types, but could work. We have demos for each of the types. This file, note this one pre-populates to allow you to handle .jpeg as well as .jpg, since both are used. I'll go ahead and create the executable here. Okay, it's associating the file. Then I go back to my desktop, find a sample JPEG file. I can choose either one, but these are the files. I'll just open this one here. It's opened into some image editing web app. Let's add our chain. We use a pencil and just draw on our image. Your image editing program might be have more features than we happen to be using, but anyways, you can make changes to the image, and then let's save them back to disk. Now we can view and potentially edit other types of media as well, such as audio and video files. Our demos currently do not allow editing of audio or video, but they conceivably could support them using browser APIs. So we'll demonstrate that here. Okay, we'll do a player. You notice that the mode is view here. We're not asking for edit ability because our web app won't be able to edit it currently, but it will play files of this type. The type of audio file here that we're supported is an OGG format. Okay, we'll save our executable to the desktop and then create it. Okay, it's open the script. It should be associated now. Go to our desktop, our audio file here. You can just double click it as it's become the default now. Oh, there's a limit in the, unfortunately, native messaging has this terrible limit of the file size, so we can't actually send this particular OGG file. I made a smaller one. Hopefully in the future they can lift that restriction, because obviously for audio and video this would be quite limiting, but here's a smaller one. And I'll play this, let you hear it through the internal microphone here that it's working. Okay, so you can play audio files. Double click it. One other media type, a binary file format, is PDF, which we'll associate here now too. Again, in theory, this should support editing of the PDF file, but this currently is only using a viewing functionality. Okay, so I enter the page I want to. In this case, we're previewing the PDF here, but we're also demonstrating another functionality, is that we're using some OCR, so we can do some other things with the file format besides just viewing and editing. There are also some specific file formats that may be of primary interest to programmers, which we'll describe now. I'll cover this second item first. One potential use of using WebAppFind, you can edit your development files using a web app, including such features as syntax highlighting and whatnot, because there are plenty of syntax highlighters out there for JavaScript. Doing the ability to edit JavaScript. So if, for example, I have this test file here, looks like this. When I open it up, I get a web app populated nicely with syntax highlighter, error reporting. You can get a full-blown IDE here if you want. I'll make some changes. I've confirmed the change has been saved to disk. Okay, so we can open and edit the files in JavaScript, but another feature we can do is we can create an executable to execute JavaScript. And what this does is it allows us to associate with the file format, but the mode is going to be shell mode. So when we open the file, it's going to treat it as the JavaScript that we have in this file as a, you see this JavaScript which will display the current date. Normally, if I were to, for example, if I open this with the edit JavaScript feature, what I get is I see the code. However, if I didn't make it the default, so that I have to go to open with. So if I open with and execute JavaScript instead, what I get is actual page executed within an HTML context. So this ability, you can execute files. Of course, it's going to be in the web context, but used in conjunction with AsYouWish, it could do some other powerful things as well. AsYouWish we'll cover later on in the video. There are other file formats that may be of interest specifically for developers. This one I think is quite interesting, is a visual programming language, such as this one by Google, Blockly. So I'll set up the ability to edit Blockly files. Okay, I'll just go ahead and open a Blockly file. This is a Blockly file. Visual programming language. If this happens, do this. You can choose other kinds of put the programs together. Now this kind of format so you could give your users the ability to make a certain subset of JavaScript without exposing them to the dangers of eval or the dangers of making typos in their code. You can provide them with some kind of programming logic, and then, as with any other file format that we have an edit mode, we can save it back to disk and confirm that changes were made. You see the changes in the XML format that this Blockly format uses. You see that the file was changed. So far, the way that we've shown that you can open files into WebAppFind has been through either the Open with right-click context menu or through a default file association. So when you double-click the file, it opens into WebAppFind, into the web app. However, there are a couple other ways in which we can select files through WebAppFind. One type of way is dynamic. one example of the dynamic type is using a droplet. So for example, we've created this using Executable Builder, but whenever we create the executable, it will work also as a droplet. So for example, if we find our executable, in this case we've saved it on the desktop, we can actually take a file, drag it to the droplet and put it on top of it, and this will cause the Firefox to open, and it will open the file for us in the mode, including making it an editable mode. As you can see, it's deleted the portion I just deleted. You can drag the sample files onto a droplet. Note that this will also work if you put the droplet in, say, the dock. If you'd rather not use the Open With menu to do it this way, you can have it available in your dock and then drag it onto here like this, and it will open it in the same manner. This will also work with app icons that are inside of an app. So for example, let's say we have this HTML file open in another program. Let's open it in text editor, for example. You can take the icon from the window, you can grab the icon and drag it to the droplet, and it will open it in the same way. Okay, one other dynamic way in which you can choose a file at runtime to open into WebAppFind is by using a feature I've just added. When you go to the Executable Builder, there's now a new feature here, File Picker. So when you build this executable, whenever you don't supply a file argument to the file picker, for example, when you double click it on the desktop or use Open With, that will provide an argument. But if you just double click the executable file itself, then it will open a file picker. So for example, let's say I want an SVG file picker. I click the file picker, go ahead and associate it. Okay, it will open up the file picker as soon as I create it. This is just an unfortunate necessity at this time, as I'm not able to work around this with AppleScript, but you just cancel it. The reason we have a file open is just because we want to do this for the user, so that when we open the app, you won't get a security warning asking whether you want to add this to your trusted apps. We just do it for you. We open the app for you. Okay, so now it's added this executable to our desktop. Now, normally this executable, you won't run it directly. Like I just showed you with the droplets, you can drag files onto it, or you get the executable associated with your default files, or you pass a file to this through the command line. There are different ways of doing it. But now that we've added the file picker support, when you double click this, the Apple script that opens will have its own file picker. Here, I'll actually put this in our dock. You can also use this on the dock, so I'll demonstrate it from the dock where it might be more convenient to have something like this. So for example, let's say you don't have your Finder files open to anything. You just click this file, you'll get a file picker, and then you can navigate to your files. So normally with WebAppFind, you're already on the desktop, and then you choose to open your files into WebAppFind. But here, we can just click the executable, and it'll give us a file picker that's not on the desktop. It's showing us the desktop, but this file picker is just available to us immediately from the dock. Then we can grab our SVG file that we want to open. And sure enough, it opens it. So in addition to these dynamic means of picking files, you can also hard code a very specific file into our executable, so that when clicking on the executable, it will always open that particular file. We first want to grab the path of the URL. We can either enter it from within WebAppFind, or we can go to the desktop and copy the app there. So I'm going to start with the HTML presets, but I'll change it to be specific to, let's say we'll just call it my HTML file. Give it that name, give it a unique ID along those lines. We don't want these fields, however, so get rid of those. Hard code, so this is where we hard code the specific desktop file we want to be able to open in our executable. This is the web app URL it will open in. We don't want a file picker. We're just going to hard code a specific file. So go ahead and create the executable. It'll cause an error at this present time when you start to register. You can just ignore that and hit OK. Okay, but we'll just ignore that. So we go to our desktop. So edit my HTML file was the executable it created. So when we double click this, we'll see it opens our HTML file. Notice that in this case, I just double clicked the executable. I didn't indicate right now what the desktop file is that I wanted, because I don't need to, because it's baked into this executable. So we could have this executable also on our dock. This is the edit my HTML file. So when we click it, it will always open for us that particular HTML file. Now in the future, I hope to be able to add icons so that you don't have just this generic icon showing up everywhere, whether it's in the desktop or within the open with. Okay, you've already seen me demonstrate how we can add these kinds of icons to the dock. We can also add it in Mac as the favorites part of the Finder window. So for example, we have this edit my HTML file app. We could put it, we add the, hit the command key, and so we can slide it in here. So it's now going to be on our favorites. So if I click edit my HTML app, it'll open up right here. So if we don't want it in the dock, we could also put it here under favorites. So I'm going to get rid of it though. So just drag it out of there. Yeah. The same thing will work with droplets. Okay, so if I add this guy to the, using the command key while I drag it, and if I go to a window that has my sample HTML file, let's try different HTML files. So I'll drop it on here. This droplet can work in the same way. It opens this particular HTML file. So besides the dock and the favorites, which we've shown you how to use, and whether in the dynamic form or static form, you can also open the app from the command line. Now the command line will work on the WebAppFind executable, which is installed in a well-known location for native apps. But you can also use the executables that you build. You can also run those from the command line, which require fewer arguments. They only require the file name. So for example, we have our edit HTML app here. You can copy the path to it. We use the command OSA script just for running Apple scripts. We point to our executable, and then all we have to do after that is indicate the specific file name. We can copy the path of that, and we can run it from the command line here. Opens it up right there. And finally, there's one other technique we can use. Mac has within it, each of its apps, it has a services feature. So different apps, like for example TextEdit, has its own services menu, has different features we could use. If we highlight some text, we can get services from either the context menu, or we can get it up in the menu bar here. Do different things with it. If we want to make a new email with the selection, open our mail program, and it added the text that I had highlighted with the new email. Up to now, I've been showing you how to pass files into WebAppFind so that web apps can open specific files. However, it's also possible using the command line to pass in a specific string that you want WebAppFind to open. Of course, since there's no file, there won't be able to save the changes back to disk, but it can at least open, you can at least pass strings through the command line for some default text that you want a web app to start working with. And the way we build this, I've just added this feature to Executable Builder. You go to Executable Builder. You choose the particular web app that you want to use, but we're not going to associate it with file types, and we're not going to hard code any files. We're just going to click this to accept a string argument. So this is the web app we wanted to open in. We don't really need edit modes, so we'll just say view. We'll save our executable on the desktop for now. We'll give it a name that's clear, edit HTML as string, and then create it. And we go to our desktop here. Okay, now when you click this file, it's not going to do anything by itself. You've got to invoke it from the command line. Okay, so now we're going to invoke it from the command line using OSA script. Next, we need the path to this executable. We can drag it here, but we're going to need to change the way that the format here. We need to put it in quotes. We get rid of the escape. Okay, now if you open it, it will open our web app, but it'll be empty because we didn't pass an argument to it. So if we want to pass our argument, here is some text, put it in quotes. Sure enough, it opens it up with the string by default. Now, again, you can't really save it because there's no file for it to save back to, but the web app you're using might be designed in a way where it just saves it on the server or lets you download the file or whatever. Okay, now that we have a means of calling the command line to open string files, I can show you a special feature that we can pass strings from while we're within another app using Mac services. We can pass a string from another app into WebAppFind instead of using the command line directly. We're going to show you a couple tools that are useful. We're working with WebAppFind. Both of them involve Mac services. Mac services allow programs within Mac to communicate with other programs in Mac. You may have used them before. If you go to your particular applications menu, the services menu can appear here, and then it lets you do different things with text that you may have highlighted within your program and whatnot. It can also appear in some programs via right-click. You can see the services here, so it lets you do things. Let's say while you're in sticky notes, you can do something to, let's say, pass along whatever you've highlighted into another program, like open it in TextEdit or send it as an email or whatnot. These are programmable. Unfortunately, there is no apparent documentation on how to build the file format used for Automator that creates these services. So we're not at this time able to build it for you within WebAppFind, but I can show you how to use Mac's easy-to-use Automator program. First, I'll show you how to make a program that's useful in its own right. It's also a Mac service. Again, all we need to do for this service is we're going to copy to the clipboard the files that we have highlighted. We don't want text. We want to be able to get to files or folders, and then it could be available from other applications. We just want it available from Finder. So that's what it is. So this copy to clipboard is not going to actually copy the file contents to the clipboard. It's going to copy the file path, which is going to be convenient for us, as I'll show you in a minute. So we save this service, copy path. Okay, and this one is going to do the actual work of communicating with the service to WebAppFind to our web app. So all we need for this is to run a shell script with the scripting argument we're going to pass the string to an application. Now we have two choices here. We could go and send it directly to the WebAppFind executable. If we go to @yourcommand, there's a convenient way you can quickly grab the path to that WebAppFind executable, which is right here, because in @yourcommand it may be useful to invoke commands against WebAppFind as well. So we'll just copy this path here. So you could, instead of using echo, we don't want to print the results, you could just invoke the native app executable, which is our WebAppFind executable, and then pass arguments to it like our string and whatnot. But we're going to show you a cleaner way to do this. So we're going to use the OSA script command, which runs an Apple script file. Here's our OSA script. We paste in. So we're going to run OSA script, OS Apple script. It's going to invoke our Apple script file, the executable that we built, and we're going to invoke it with whatever string is passed to our service. So that's all we need here. Now we're going to save this service. We're going to call it edit HTML as string. And now that service should be available from within other programs. So let's say if we're in Stickies, we can go up to services up here. Then we can edit HTML string from here, or we can also do the right click, services, edit HTML string. So when I do that from within Stickies with this text I've highlighted, it pastes the text into our web app as well, dynamically. So you can communicate from with other apps can go into a web app of your choosing. Now you'll notice though that unlike with what @yourcommand can do, Mac services just allows us to grab the unformatted text. We're not able this time to grab formatted text to pass along. The repository WebAppFind demo samples, in addition to the sample files and demos, it contains two utilities which, though they're not required, they can make your life a little bit easier in dealing with the WebAppFind APIs. The first one is for simplifying the means of adding meta tags into the head of the document to advertise the file types that your web app supports. Normally you'd have to escape the HTML attributes because the format, although it's not complex, could require some escaping. You first import the script, then you call the add metas function, which accepts an array of different objects which contain the metadata. In this case, for example, the executable name that we want to suggest to the user is edit HTML. The unique ID we use is in this reverse DNS format. The mode under which we're opening, we do want to be more than just read only. We want to be able to edit HTML files in this case, so we put the edit mode. There's a little redundancy currently in the API where you indicate extensions. It can be an array, but if you're indicating default extensions, you have to repeat that information to indicate that you want that one to also become the default. So when you double click the file on the desktop, it will open into our web app. Same thing with content types and default content types. And then finally you add the site into which you wish the file to be opened. In this case we're using a local host, but it could be any internet domain. Okay, and just scrolling down, I'll show you that, for example, you can, as I mentioned, you can use, in some cases the values are, this library supports booleans, for example, to indicate that you wish binary. Let's see, where's JPEG? In the case of JPEG, for example, we're indicating that we want to support two kinds of extensions, and in this case we also want to make both of them the default. The second library, WebAppFind.js, is for simplifying the means of communication between WebAppFind and your web app when WebAppFind is passing in a file. Its API will look like this. You import WebAppFind, and then basically all you do is you create an instance and you pass it an object with optionally view, which you probably need. It's not required, but you probably need it. With the content property, which is basically going to be the file contents. Whether if it's binary, this will be an array, but otherwise it's going to be a string of the UTF-8 string. So in this case, we're just setting our text box, our text area, to whatever value that WebAppFind gets from the file. There's also a save end. We could add a save end listener here, which will basically just informs us when there's a, and I think it accepts the path. Oops, path ID. It indicates a path ID at the moment, but basically this will be invoked every time the saving completes. Okay, and how do you complete saving, you're asking? Is you take the instance and you use the save method against it, and it will return a promise, and when it's finished, you can listen here instead for the save end event. This one would be more of a global save end that you'll get for every single save that you do, but in the case of a promise, when you do a save, the returned promise resolves to the save end for this particular save in this case. So it indicate this will just going to alert what the path ID is, which is the idea with the path ID is to give some unique identifier. In the future, we may give an option of preference to allow the actual path on the file system, but that's only with user approval and whatnot. That should only be the case. But that's all there is to that API. Now, looking to the future for WebAppFind and technologies that are similar to it, one possibility is that the core behavior of WebAppFind may end up being standardized. There's an encouraging comment here, which mentions that a proposal for file handlers might become part of the web app manifest specification, where a website indicates a manifest file, and in that manifest file, file handlers would be specified for the web app in question. Currently, WebAppFind discovers the suggested handlers through meta elements, but we could possibly retool WebAppFind to be a polyfill for this web app manifest feature, assuming there was a specification, but not yet quickly an implementation from on the browser side. But hopefully it'll become standardized and just part of the browser. If not, hopefully WebAppFind can continue or fill any gaps. I can't compare yet what the technology might be, but hopefully it'll meet the needs we wish. We've so far discussed maintaining control over local files, but you may also wish to have control over remote files, whether to retrieve them, but also even to possibly overwrite them in a way that's convenient, that like our local files doesn't force you to rediscover their path and use other means to obtain the file, like FTP or whatnot. In the future, I would like to see a feature added to WebAppFind which would allow a website to make a put request back to the server, so that for those who had access any remote file they had retrieved, they could right-click while on that file and send that file's contents into some application, like for example, an HTML editor. And then when saving the HTML, instead of saving the HTML file locally, it would directly make a put request back to the server. Now, you could technically implement this behavior right now, but it's not streamlined, so it's not automated. But you could have your web app that opens a file could be informed of some contents and send it back to the server using something like our AtYourCommand component, which we'll explain in a little bit. But we'd like to have this streamlined as part of WebAppFind. And besides that, we want web apps to be able to get file control. We also sometimes want native apps to be able to retrieve and edit web files, like remote files. So for whatever remote file we might be viewing, we hopefully can use the same technology to pass that on to a desktop app. We've discussed the benefits of being able to integrate files used by the browser in the file system. But some of these benefits, at least some of the benefits, might be obtained from having a shared storage API, a shared storage area that's in the browser to which all web apps could gain access potentially upon user permission, and without any site being the sole arbiter of access to that data. There's some hopeful signs mentioned in this comment about the possible encouragement for the possible consideration as a future API. At the present time, we might even develop a polyfill which might be hosted on a particular site rather than in a browser, as would be ideal. But as a polyfill, it might work to have a shared storage area where a website hosted on a particular domain could be the arbiter and require user permission, like we're displaying some kind of like a modal dialog for the time being. And then if the user approves, then granting that access within that domain. And any storage limits could be overcome by chaining some domains together, but that might be an overly complicated solution if the browsers could support it. And finally, our WebAppFind that we've discussed so far, it only allows the opening of files and opening only one file at a time and just for that session only. In the future, we'd be able to allow you to create a web app to create bare files so that could initialize a file in the first place and then allow you to edit that. You'd also like the ability for you to grant permissions to a whole directory at a time and all the child directories, even potentially your whole desktop if you wanted a web app to act as, let's say, a file browser. And we'd like to be able to ensure that whatever permissions you grant could be persisted, so that once you approved a file, you could have an option to keep that permission persisted so that the web app could just access the file rather than you needing to click on the file to open it. So for example, that would enable a web app which could, let's say, have a project view, which when you click, it would show you the files that you had previously permitted, and you could just click on those within the web app. That would be one use case for allowing a web app to do that, but it would need special privileges and be under user control and whatnot. And then there may be some other specialized types of behaviors, like even the ability, let's say, to search your local files or from a web app, or to have special modes. For example, the ability to define a mode that defines a particular app as a validator, so that maybe that's all it would do is validate a particular file format for you, or lots of possibilities of potential modes. Another component of WebAppFind, which we are currently bundling into WebAppFind, is AtYourCommand. Now, with WebAppFind, the core of WebAppFind, you're able to handle viewing local file data in a web app of your choice. But sometimes you might wish to go to the other direction while you're already in some web app and you want to extract some data out of that website you're visiting and send it into a local app, or for that matter, into another web app. That's what AtYourCommand can help you to do. Now, with WebAppFind, we don't have the capability like GreaseMonkey, the Firefox add-on, that's able to access content as it loads. So we can't just grab data as it loads from a website and send it to a web app or a native app. Instead, though, once a page has loaded, we can grab data out of it and send it and pass it on. AtYourCommand allows for two kinds of invocations. One kind is if you just make a one-off invocation where you just intend to use that one time and not have it be remembered, and then you can also save the commands for AtYourCommand. Whatever web page you're on, let's say you wanted to just send this text to a local app. Well, you can use At your command, right click, WebAppFind, and if I had a save command here, it would show in this menu. But I don't, so I can either create a one-off command right now, or I can go to edit commands and go ahead and give a name for this. If I go to edit commands, you'll see that it comes with this area pre-opened, which lists the commands that exist. Currently there are none, so it just lists create new command. Okay, this section here is how we create the command. We'll just go through each section one by one and then demonstrate it. First of all, this button here lets you hide the command list, so let's hide it for now. Once you've learned how to embed variables, which I'll explain shortly, you might forget how they function. So this section is here to allow you to remember that. It lists various variables and what their purpose is and what they obtain. First of all, this should be surrounded within angled brackets. And as it mentions, the other text is just going to be passed without modification to the command line. So if you have a variable, let's say page title, with angled brackets around it within your command, within an argument, that will be substituted and will become the actual title of the current page. You can see from the page that we're on, page title is this, Wikipedia, the free encyclopedia, because as you can see up here at the title, that's where that came from, because that's what the page title is. Actually, this should probably be titled substitutions available, because they're not necessarily used. I'll probably fix that shortly, but this shows you all of the variables that are currently available on this page. One special one which isn't complete quite yet is the details one, which should allow you to obtain the headers of the page too if you want to send the header content metadata. But other information here is specific to, let's say, the body, the text body, or our selected HTML, which is like what I had highlighted, or as in text form will be here. More options hopefully could be available in the future, even possibly obtaining specific local storage out of the page, or basically the idea is to be able to let you get whatever you want out of the page and send it elsewhere into the app of your choice, native or web app. Okay, so we can give it a name if we want to save it. If we're doing a one-off as a one-off command, the one-off command will be the same as this, but it won't show the list. So if we do a one-off command, we don't need a name, but in this case, let's make a name. I'm going to say open web app find string. We get a preview box here to see what the command is as we build it, which we'll start to see shortly. And if there's any result from the command, it can be, assuming you keep the dialog open, it will show up here. If you don't want your context menu particular item to show up anywhere and everywhere, you can restrict the context of where it shows up. This lists the HTML elements you can choose from, so that if you're right-clicking, let's say you only want it to show up on a text area, you could unclick all of these items here and then just have it set to click on a text area or whatever element you want. So if you don't select all, it's the same effect as showing up everywhere. This just should show always. Okay, you can also restrict the context to show if there's text highlighted, or you can use a CSS selector to indicate on which elements it should show up. For the app that we're going to invoke, we can add our path here. The Firefox command prompt just added by default, but you can do a path to any executable on your desktop. You can, if you want to invoke some command line arguments on Firefox itself or the command prompt. But in this case, we're going to demo here WebAppFind itself. So we want to choose that our executable is going to be WebAppFind, because what we want to do is, in this case, is we're going to send this text into a web app. Although we could send it to a local app by putting the local app's path here. Well, we're going to send it to a web app instead right now. Okay, and then we have the arguments here that we want to send. In this case, for WebAppFind, we need to have method client, because there are other potential, for example, building the executables that can be done on the command line. So what we want is an actual WebAppFind client that will communicate with WebAppFind to open this website's content in that web app. Okay, we add another argument. In this case, we indicate the site which we want to open in. Finally, the string argument. Now, normally the string argument you can pass into the command line allows some block of text that you want to show up in the web app. So if I did this, gotta turn my server on. If you're using the WebAppFind demo samples that comes with those bunch of apps you can use, then you need to run npm start on that repository. So what it did was it opened the text we wanted. Actually, I didn't need it in quotes. Okay, so it shows it up here. But in this case, we don't want to send a hard-coded string in there. We want to send our selected text. So we put that inside a variable, and then we execute it. Sure enough, it sends it right away to the web app with the data pre-populated. So basically this works similar to services in the Mac, which we show you elsewhere in this video how to do. But there's more you can do, basically, because you can obtain the HTML. You can not just copy the text like services lets you do. It could copy the highlighted HTML string that you're working on. Let's see if I can. I'm going to grab a link here and send it. I haven't saved. Let me save my command here though first. I've just been executing it until now. So I saved it. Should show up in the list of names. Open WebAppFind string there's the name. So now if we right click, we have open WebAppFind string. We're highlighting this HTML. Yes, it grabbed the text, but I forgot we're still showing selected text. But in this case, let's change it to HTML. So we'll save it again. Sure enough, it pastes the link in there, which you can confirm by looking at the source, and there's the HTML. So you can do that. That's something you can't do with Mac services, but you can do with WebAppFind. In addition to being able to send website data to WebAppFind, we can also send it to a desktop app or to a system command. So, for example, we just send it I shouldn't be overwriting this one. I'm going to create a new command here. Create a new command, echo, let's call it echo. Okay, so here, if our command, which is an executable command, it doesn't need to just be an executable. It can actually be just a system command. So we say echo and then have our information here. We can echo the page title too. We get the result over here. This preview isn't quite accurate because obviously this would have been quoted, but that's just a current limitation. Rather than having a very long command string, if you wanted to have some hard-coded files or URLs available to your command, you can put them separately here, and you can add any number that you want. But let's just put one here as an example. Okay, for example, if you wanted a temporary file, or you want a sample URL as part of your command, you can use the variable in this form. Okay, we'll use the echo, system echo to see this data. Oops, I should have followed my instructions here. Row 1. So it's added the file and the URL, and then it can also add, it adds our entire string. So file, oops, I'm going to space here. Okay, so file is this. Oops, that didn't work. We have trouble with new lines here, but we'll probably need to add that in the future. For now, I'll just add a semicolon. Okay, so you get the idea here. Now, we can also, as mentioned, besides passing to WebAppFind or the system commands, we can just call a particular executable. I want to call available on the path, for example. I want to call node. I'll give it the name Open Node Test. We'll keep it in for all contexts at the moment. We don't need this. We've got a file here. We'll demo. It's just going to say hello and then echo the argument that's passed to it. I'm going to copy the path, pass it in here. So, and then I'll pass the argument that I want to be echoed. In this case, I'll say page title. I'll say hello world. Here's the title. I ran into an error here because I probably need to be making this as its own argument. Yes, so I should have put that second thing as its own argument, which I now have done. So it invokes node against our script file here, and it passes this as the argument, as the single argument. It could be more arguments. So it gets the hello from the script, and then hello world, and then here's the title, our hard-coded string, and then it gets the actual page title. So you can craft, pretty much what you want from the use of the strings and these various substitutions that are done. It should allow for pretty flexible power that you can pass to a local app like we just did. There may be some quirks though to iron out, but feel free to file any issues. And you'll see that our new commands are available here. To open node test is available too. In this case though, it's not very useful to be executing that command because the local app is merely logging to console. So, but if we wanted to save a string to a file or open an app and display the text of that app, we could do so. We've discussed core WebAppFind, and we've discussed AtYourCommand, which upon user permission, they grant very granular and specific privileges. You direct WebAppFind to open just one single file and grant only that permission. And AtYourCommand, you click a portion of the page and send only that portion of the page and some other metadata to a particular web app. Particular metadata for that page to the web app. There's not a great fear there of abuse by web apps when it can only access just a small portion of data at a time. Of course, there are risks, and if a person doesn't know what they're doing and sends the web data, of course, a web app may abuse the particular data that it sends, but the issue is that web app is not getting access to a great deal of power. It's just specific to one particular file or the info from one particular web page. And that only occurs again at user discretion. But sometimes also at user discretion, you might want a trusted web app to be able to do more without having to build an add-on to do it. To have access to powerful APIs, access to more than one file at a time, to be able to do so at its own discretion. And for that, currently we're bundling AsYouWish as one component of WebAppFind. We may move it out, or probably would like to move it out to its own extension in the future. but currently it's just more convenient to leverage the Node framework that we have in place, but we may move it out to its own extension in the future. AsYouWish had been an add-on previously for Firefox, but in this current incarnation, because Firefox has changed, we're more limited in what we can offer here. So rather than giving you granular permissions to exactly which API you're going to use, you just only can request to get eval access, the highest level of access. You can direct a website to be able to get that permission. So we have two kinds of privileges that AsYouWish can gain access to. Each of them at the current time requires a separate prompt from the user to grant permission for that type. One is browser eval, one is node eval. The browser eval is eval, a very powerful eval that lets, just like a background script in the add-on, it can do pretty much whatever the add-on is empowered to do. And since our add-on currently is bundled with a manifest that allows all the APIs of it, can pretty much do whatever the add-on web extensions system allows. But because WebAppFind is able to communicate with Node, AsYouWish can also request Node permissions. And particularly given the high level of access that you can be granted, it's very important that AsYouWish applications and users of those applications bear in mind that applications are subject to cross-site scripting or other dangers, so one really has to have a lot of trust in not only the good intentions of the site that they're using with AsYouWish, but also the competence of that site, not to have any security loopholes. Currently it communicates through you add a message listener to your page. It uses the WebAppFind namespace, but it doesn't have a method on it like the other behaviors we send around for saving files and whatnot. But there is one command, eval ready, to listen for on the message, and if eval ready is present, it means you can start. In this case, we say add on eval. Basically, we want the browser window open. Note that if you return a promise in this code, as we do here with the browser tabs create, being the last line of our code, AsYouWish will wait for that promise to resolve before returning the result to your script. And then we perform some node behavior. This is running the node that's bundled with the add-on, and then in this case we're just going to get the results of, as far as the receipt of the reply has to be in JSON. But you could have multiple commands, for example, within a string that chain together. If there is no eval ready command, we can just check for the results, and in this case we're going to alert it. So here we go to a page which has AsYouWish demo, which is part of the WebAppFind demo samples repository. And we go to our context menu and enable AsYouWish for the tab. So it gives us this prompt. Remember, our first request was for add-on privileges. So it says, are you sure you trust this site to evaluate potentially dangerous add-on code? We say, okay. Okay, now it's making another prompt, which is this prompt here for the node eval. Are you sure you trust the site to evaluate potentially dangerous Node.js code? So you say, okay, now we're going to get the responses, and the responses will be, we're alerting them currently. We're stringifying the result. So this is the response of the add-on. The results includes like the tab. We opened a tab here. We opened some Wikipedia tabs here. Let me try this one more time. So let's see this in action. So there you go. It opened one Wikipedia tab as per this code here. So that's how you get permissions from AsYouWish. And remember, this is dangerous, so don't grant this permission to websites freely. This should only be used with trusted and competent sites. You must be particularly careful as an HTML author not to expose cross-site scripting and such vulnerabilities, because it could expose full privileges to an attacker. AsYouWish in its present form now also allows persistence of permissions. So you may whitelist specific sites that you grant permission to operate without confirmation per session. These permissions are per site, and that includes the search string. And this is to avoid your users accidentally and inadvertently granting full AsYouWish permissions to one app, and lets them avoid the risk of accidentally visiting some untrusted HTML on your server that you might have just had there, but the only HTML you wish to grant AsYouWish permissions might have been a different app. So the permissions are not for the whole origin of your site, they're specific to a particular path. So you might have to adjust your application accordingly. If you go to About Add-ons and then choose Extensions, and then either click More or Preferences, you can see the full list of WebAppFind's preferences. Currently, it's limited right now to some AsYouWish preferences. We'll cover this preference first. Besides allowing AsYouWish to work on a per session basis where you right-click and approve it every time, you can actually whitelist certain sites that should be given AsYouWish privileges. But again, be very careful which sites you would trust to do this. They should be both trustworthy and competent, because any flaw could potentially expose you when visiting another site to whatever weaknesses they have in their app, allowing a malicious site to gain privileges on your machine. So it's quite powerful what this grants, and you should use it very cautiously. Okay, so we're going to whitelist two different apps for now. Also, you should restrict yourself generally wherever possible to HTTPS sites or to localhost, any sites which are not liable to man-in-the-middle attacks. Regular HTTP is liable to such attacks. Unfortunately, the file protocol does not work currently with AsYouWish, so that can't work. But you can use localhost, which is what we're going to do. And we're going to demo right now two different files. Each one happens to only request one type of permission. One file requests the node permission, one file requests the browser permission. So for the browser permission, we'll get this URL here. We just paste it into the allowed sites and it gets listed here. I'll also add permission for this guy. And then to get rid of them, you click remove. Make sure to click this remove, not this remove. This remove is to remove the add-on, to remove AsYouWish itself. Okay, so now, although normally when I loaded this page it says waiting for activation, if I refresh the page, it automatically grants the privilege without prompting a dialog. And notice it's listed some privilege information here. Notably, we've listed current browser tabs, something that a web app normally would definitely not have access to for privacy reasons. But AsYouWish, because you whitelisted this site, gets that permission to use the fancy browser APIs of web extensions which can do powerful things like that. Now if we go to this page, which demonstrates node features, we'll refresh the page, and without needing a per session prompt, we actually get a list of my system files. And this app is basically, it's a local file browser. And if you want to revoke the permission, like I said, you go and remove it. So I've removed it for this file. So next time I refresh the page, it won't give me that privilege. There's also this privilege here, which lets you auto-approve sites that you've confirmed once for AsYouWish, to let them automatically be added in your whitelist so that the next time you visit them, you won't have to approve them again. And that's all. We've covered usage of WebAppFind, including its core, including the Executable Builder component, including the currently bundled AtYourCommand and the currently bundled AsYouWish. If you have any questions, feel free to email me, or if you have any issues, you may file them on the repository or file pull requests. Take care.